My daughter snapped, "I'm not your servant, mother," then stormed to the bank with my debit card. She didn't know I had already signed power of attorney to someone else 3 days earlier. The teller scanned my old debit card once, then again. I wasn't there to see it, but I know exactly how it went, because Marcus told me every detail 2 hours later, sitting at my kitchen table with a manila folder and a look on his face like a man delivering a verdict he'd been waiting years to read aloud. Jessica's smile faded first, then her eyes looked up to the teller, then back down to the little screen between them, like she could will the numbers into changing. "Ma'am," the teller said, "I'm going to need to get my manager." My daughter, 34 years old, mother of my only grandchild, stood at that counter and had no idea that 3 days earlier I had quietly, legally, and permanently taken back everything she thought she still owned a piece of. I'm Diane. I'm 72. And that Tuesday was the day I stopped being anyone's rescue plan. I raised Jessica alone starting when she was 6, the year her father decided fatherhood was a part-time hobby he'd lost interest in. No child support that meant anything. No calls on birthdays past the first 2 years. Just me, a 2-bedroom rental in Scottsdale, and a decision I made in the parking lot of a Circle K the week he left. Whatever this costs me, she will never know we don't have enough. I was a dental hygienist by day at a practice on Shea Boulevard, and 3 nights a week I cleaned offices downtown after the hygienist shift ended. I'd get home at 11, sleep 5 hours, and do it again. My hands cracked from the cleaning chemicals no matter how much lotion I used. My lower back has never, not once in 30 years, been without some low hum of ache in it. I didn't complain. Complaining felt like a luxury item I couldn't afford next to rent. Dance lessons because she begged for them at 8. A car at 17 used, paid for in cash I'd been setting aside since she was 14. Every semester of college because I didn't want her carrying the kind of debt that follows you into your 30s. And her wedding, $15,000. Money I had earmarked for my own retirement. Money that was supposed to be the cushion between me and exactly the kind of situation I eventually found myself in. I told myself it was fine. That's what mothers do. You give until there's a floor under your child, even if there's none left under you. I want to be honest about something because I think it matters for what comes later. I don't regret giving her those things. I regret what I let it turn into. 2 years ago, Jessica's husband Derek lost his job at a logistics company when they restructured his whole department. Jessica called me crying, asked if they could stay with me just a few weeks while Derek found something new. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Of course I said yes. She's my daughter. 14 months. They never once contributed to groceries or utilities in 14 months. I'd come home from my job. I'd moved from hygienist work to a pharmacy technician position by then, my back finally forcing the change, and find dishes stacked in my sink that had been there since the morning. I'd find people I didn't know sitting in my living room drinking a bottle of wine I'd been saving for my sister's visit. When I so gently asked if they could chip in for groceries, Jessica looked at me like I'd suggested something obscene. "We're family, Mom. We're going through a hard time." I told myself that was true. I told myself a lot of things were true that year. Then came my credit card statement in March of last year. $8,140 in charges I hadn't made. Designer clothing from a boutique in Fashion Square. A trip to Napa I never took. Hotel and flights both. When I sat Jessica down with the statement in my hand, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, she cried. Real tears. The kind that used to break my heart when she was small and skinned her knee. "I was going to pay you back, Mom. I swear. Derek and I were just so stressed. I paid the balance myself rather than report it." I told myself that was mercy. I understand now it was the moment the entire architecture of my life started to lean. After that, the requests never stopped coming. Each one smaller than the credit card fraud. Each one somehow easier to say yes to because of that. Her car payment twice. Derek's phone bill. Their security deposit on the apartment they finally moved into after month 14. A check I wrote for $2,200 that I told myself was the last one. It was never the last one. Over the following 2 years, I calculated, and I want to be precise here because precision is the only thing that kept me sane through this, that I gave Jessica and Derek $51,400. Every cent of it came out of the retirement account I'd built with cleaning office money and cracked hands and a back that never stopped hurting. I fell in my hallway in September. My hip caught the runner rug wrong and I went down, and I heard the crack in my wrist before I felt it. And then I felt it in a way I hope none of you ever have to feel anything. I lay on my own hallway floor for 11 minutes before I got my phone out of my cardigan pocket, and the first person I called wasn't 911. It was my daughter. "Mom, I have a meeting," Jessica said. Her voice had the clipped, distracted tone of someone glancing at their calendar while you talk. "Just call an Uber," to the emergency room, with a fracture in my radius that the ER doctor later told me was, and I remember his exact words, "a nasty one for someone your age, Mrs. Coleman. You're lucky it didn't displace." My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, heard me crying through our shared wall. Our houses sit close enough on that street that you can hear a phone ring next door, and she came over in her robe and drove me herself. She sat with me for 6 hours in that waiting room and then the treatment room, made me laugh once about the hospital coffee, held my good hand when they set the fracture. Jessica showed up 3 days later with a bouquet of grocery store carnations and a list of reasons she couldn't have come sooner, none of which, when I ran them back through my head later, actually explained why a phone call wasn't possible. When I asked her, once I was home and one-handed and struggling to open jars and wash my own hair, if she could help me for even a week, cooking, cleaning, driving me to follow-ups, she told me, and I am quoting this exactly because I wrote it down that night with my left hand in shaking, ugly print, that I needed to be more independent. I was 72 years old with a broken dominant wrist. That was the word she used. Independent. Last Next month, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and hypertension in the same appointment. Dr. Alvarez sat across from me and explained the medication regimen, the dietary changes, the monitoring, and I remember thinking, distantly, the way you think about weather in a country you're not currently in, that I would need help managing all of this. I called Jessica that evening actually hoping, foolishly hoping, that this would be the thing that broke through. That's rough, Mom. Can't talk right now. 2 weeks later, she called me. Not to check on the diabetes, not to ask about my blood pressure numbers, which, by the way, were bad enough that Dr. Alvarez had used the word concerning twice. Derek and I need $20,000 for a down payment. I had $23,000 left. The entire remainder of a retirement account that once, 15 years ago, held over $300,000. Jessica, I can't. Not with my medical bills, and I have almost nothing left. You're so selfish, she snapped, and I actually pulled the phone away from my ear because of the volume of it. Maybe if you weren't wasting money on that dump you call a house, we wouldn't even be in this position. I told her quietly that I loved her, and that I needed her to understand I physically did not have the money to give. Don't come crying to me when you're old and useless, she said. God, you're so dramatic about everything. She hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that, phone still in my hand, and I did not cry right away. The crying came later, that night, after I'd washed my dinner dishes and taken my new medications and gone to bed, and lay there in the dark doing math I didn't want to do about what would happen to me if I kept saying yes. Mrs. Patterson heard me through the wall again. She came over in her robe again, and this time, instead of just sitting with me, she said one sentence that I think about almost every day now. Diane, you need to protect yourself. Not from strangers, from her. Mrs. Patterson's son, Marcus Patterson, is an estate attorney. 38 years old, 12 years in practice, most of it at a firm in Phoenix specializing in elder law and asset protection. I had met him exactly twice before, both times at his mother's Christmas parties, both times exchanging maybe 10 words about the weather. I did not know, sitting in my kitchen the morning after that phone call, that he would become one of the 3 people who saved what was left of my life. He came over that same week, not in a suit, just jeans and a Diamondbacks cap, carrying a legal pad and an expression of someone who had clearly heard the broad strokes from his mother and was now here to get the specifics. Diane, I'm going to ask you some direct questions, and I need honest answers, even the embarrassing ones. He said, how much has Jessica taken from you total that you can document? We went through it together at my kitchen table. Bank statements going back 3 years, which I had, thank God, because I've kept meticulous records since my working days. An old habit from handling patient billing at the dental office that turned out to matter more than I ever imagined it would. The credit card fraud from March of last year, cash withdrawals I remembered giving her for the car, the phone, the deposit. By the time we finished, the number was $51,400, and Marcus wrote it at the top of the legal pad and underlined it twice. Here's what we're going to do, he said. First, I'm drawing up a durable power of attorney and a revocable living trust. Your house, your remaining retirement funds, your accounts, all of it moves into the trust, with a successor trustee named who is not Jessica. If anything happens to you medically, decisions get made by someone bound by fiduciary duty, not someone who's already demonstrated she'll treat your finances as a personal line of credit. Who's the successor trustee? I asked. You get to pick. A lot of clients in your position choose a professional fiduciary rather than a family member, specifically to remove any appearance of favoritism or conflict. I can give you 3 names of licensed professional fiduciaries in the county if you want that route. He gave me 3 names that afternoon, printed on a single sheet with a line or 2 about each, years in practice, whether they specialized in elder estates or broader trust administration, roughly how large a caseload they carried. I called 2 of the 3 that same week. One never called back, which told me something on its own. The other, a man named Feldstein, was pleasant enough on the phone but talked mostly about his fee structure and very little about what he'd actually do if a family member showed up at his office demanding access to funds he controlled. It was a reasonable answer, it just wasn't the one I needed. I chose the 3rd name. Her name is Renata Cho, a licensed professional fiduciary with 11 years of experience managing exactly this kind of estate. Most of it, she told me later, involving adult children rather than the predatory strangers people assume are the more common threat. I met with her twice before signing anything, because Marcus insisted I feel entirely comfortable before committing, and both meetings ran well past their scheduled hour because she kept asking questions I hadn't thought to ask myself. What happened if I became incapacitated suddenly? Who would have visibility into disbursements? How disputes between beneficiaries were typically handled? What her reporting obligations were to me personally versus to any court? By the 2nd meeting, I understood the difference between hiring someone competent and hiring someone who had simply done this a long time. Renata was both. One more thing, Marcus said near the end of that first meeting, setting his pen down and looking at me directly. Close your existing bank account. Open a new one at a different institution if you're comfortable with that, and don't tell Jessica any of this is happening. Not because you're being cruel, because right now, today, she has access, a shared card, a key to your house, knowledge of your routines, and if she senses this coming, she may act rashly, and I've seen that go badly for elderly clients more than once. The word elderly landed on me strangely. I didn't think of myself that way, but I understood what he meant. I did everything he said. Every dollar in the old account moved to a new one at a credit union across town. The old account closed entirely. Jessica's name removed as an authorized user on every card. My insurance beneficiary designations updated. My emergency contact at both my doctor's office and the pharmacy where I worked changed from Jessica to Mrs. Patterson, with Marcus's cell number added as a backup. The power of attorney and trust documents signed and notarized on a Thursday afternoon in Marcus's Mrs. Office, with a notary named Beatrice Nunley witnessing, her stamp pressed into the paper with a finality that felt, honestly, like the first deep breath I'd taken in 3 years. I did not say one word of this to my daughter. 3 days later, she let herself into my house using a key I had genuinely forgotten she still had. Groceries in one hand, purse in the other, wearing the expression she always wore when she wanted something and had already decided I'd give it to her. "I'm storing some things in your garage fridge," she announced, not a question, walking past me toward the garage door like she was still 14 months into a stay that had ended over a year ago. I asked, as calmly as I could manage, for my house key back. She laughed, not a nervous laugh, a real, dismissive laugh, the kind you'd give a child who said something absurd. "You think you still have control?" she said, stepping toward me. And she is taller than me, always has been since she was 15. And in that moment, the height difference felt like something else entirely, something colder. "I'm not your servant, Mother. I don't jump when you say jump. Jessica, I need my key back, and I need you to understand that things are going to be different going forward." "I'm going to the bank," she snapped, already turning, already grabbing her purse off the counter where she'd set it. "I'll use your card since you don't appreciate me spending my own money on your stupid fridge." She stormed out the door. I heard her car, the Honda Accord I'd co-signed for 4 years ago, and that she still hadn't finished paying off, pull out of my driveway too fast, tires chirping slightly on the asphalt. I stood in my kitchen after the door slammed, and I want to describe honestly what I felt because it wasn't fear, and it wasn't triumph either. It was something quieter and stranger, a kind of held breath I'd been holding, I think, for about 3 years, because I knew exactly what was waiting for her at that bank, and she had absolutely no idea. At 10:32 that morning, Jessica walked into the Bank of America branch on Scottsdale Road, my old debit card in her hand, ready to withdraw money that had not belonged to that account or to me for 3 days. The teller, her name I'd learn later was Priya Deshmukh, 4 years with the bank, scanned the card once. The system flagged it. She scanned it again, assuming a red error, and the second scan confirmed what the first one showed. Closed account, 0 balance, flagged for a formal ownership dispute. Her instructions Marcus had filed with the bank's fraud department the day the account closed. Standard procedure, he told me, for elder protection cases where a former authorized user might attempt continued access. Jessica's smile faded. According to Marcus, who reviewed the branch's incident report later as part of building a broader paper trail, she asked Priya to run it again, then asked to speak to whoever could fix the glitch. That's when Priya said the sentence that, in a strange way, I think of as the actual ending of my old relationship with my daughter and the beginning of whatever this new, quieter, sadder thing is now. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to get my manager." The branch manager, David Ostrowski, came out and explained, in the careful, liability-conscious language bank employees are trained to use, that the account had been closed by its owner, and that he could not discuss the details of who currently held authority over related accounts with someone who was not on file as an authorized party. Jessica, according to the incident report, raised her voice, said the word illegal more than once, demanded to know where her money had gone. David told her, correctly, that no money belonging to her had gone anywhere, because the account had never belonged to her in the first place. She left the bank without the $1,500 she'd apparently intended to withdraw for reasons I still don't fully know, called me 4 times in the next hour, and when I didn't answer, Marcus had advised me not to, at least not that day, not until I'd had time to prepare. She drove to my house. I was there. Mrs. Patterson was there too, sitting with me at my kitchen table because we'd agreed she would be present for whatever came next. Jessica didn't knock. She still had that spare key, at least until she used it that final time, and she came through my front door with a look on her face I had genuinely never seen from her before, not even during the credit card confrontation 2 years earlier. "What did you do?" she said. Not a greeting, not a question that expected a gentle answer. "I protected myself," I said. My voice shook slightly. I won't pretend it didn't, but the words came out clear. "You closed my bank account?" "It was never your bank account, Jessica. It was mine. You had a card because I trusted you, and I don't anymore." What followed was ugly, and I'm not going to soften it, because I think the ugliness matters for anyone listening to this who's in a similar situation and needs permission to see clearly what's actually happening in their own kitchen. She called me selfish again. She called me a liar. She said I was punishing her for one mistake, meaning, I understood, the $8,000 in credit card fraud, as though that had been the only mistake in a 3-year pattern rather than simply the loudest one. She said, and this is the line that finally, fully, completely closed something in my chest that had been open and bleeding for a very long time. "You're supposed to take care of me. That's what mothers do." Mrs. Patterson stood up at that point. She's a small woman, 68 years old, but she has a presence when she wants one, and she used it. "Jessica," she said, "I've watched your mother work herself into the ground for you since you were a teenager. I sat with her in an emergency room while you had a meeting. I think it's time you left." Jessica left. She took the spare key off her ring, threw it on my counter hard enough that it skidded onto the floor, and told me, on her way out, that I would regret this, that I'd be alone, that nobody would visit a bitter old woman who chose money over family. I picked the key up off the floor after she was gone. My hands, I noticed, were not shaking. shaking anymore. I want to be clear about something because I think it's important, and because Marcus said it to me directly during our second meeting. This was never actually about the $20,000 or the down payment or even the $8,000 credit card fraud. Those were symptoms. The actual disease, if I can call it that, was a pattern that had been allowed to calcify over 3 years because I kept treating each individual demand as an isolated, forgivable event instead of what it actually was, a single ongoing behavior with a single ongoing cost. Renata Cho, once she formally took over as trustee, asked to review the full financial history Marcus and I had compiled, partly for her own fiduciary due diligence and partly, she told me gently, because documenting the pattern clearly would matter if Jessica ever attempted any kind of legal challenge to the trust or the power of attorney. People assume elder financial exploitation looks like a stranger scamming someone over the phone, Renata told me during our first working meeting. Her third year managing a caseload that, she mentioned, had grown considerably as more families dealt with adult children in financial distress. In my experience, it's family members far more often than strangers, and it's rarely one dramatic theft. It's usually exactly what happened to you, a slow erosion, dollar by dollar, favor by favor, until the person doing it genuinely believes they're entitled to continue. She helped me formalize something I hadn't considered, a written accounting log, dated and specific, of every transfer, every loan, every unauthorized charge, cross-referenced against my bank statements, not for revenge, for clarity, and for protection, in case Jessica or Derek ever tried to claim the trust had been established under duress, or that I'd been manipulated by Marcus, or any of the other things Renata said families sometimes allege when the money stops flowing. 2 weeks after the bank incident, Jessica did exactly that. She retained an attorney, a young man named Cole Faraday, according to the letter that arrived at my house, and sent a formal letter alleging that the power of attorney had been executed while I was not of sound mind due to my recent diabetes diagnosis and under the undue influence of Marcus and his mother. I won't lie. Reading that letter made my hands shake for the first time in weeks, not because I doubted myself, but because there is something uniquely disorienting about your own child suggesting, in writing, through a lawyer, that you're not competent to run your own life. Marcus was unbothered in a way that steadied me considerably. This is common, he said, and it's exactly why we did everything the way we did. You had 2 separate meetings with Renata before signing anything, both documented. You executed the documents in my office with an independent notary present who has no relationship to either of us. Your primary care physician, Dr. Alvarez, examined you the same week and made no note whatsoever of any cognitive concern. I have that record. And most importantly, Diane, you initiated this entire process. Nobody approached you. You and my mother came to me. He walked me through, step by step, what an undue influence claim actually requires to succeed. Not just a suspicion, but evidence of a confidential relationship combined with suspicious circumstances surrounding the document's execution. Typically some combination of secrecy, haste, isolation from independent advice, or a dramatic and unexplained change from a prior estate plan. None of that fits your timeline, he said. You weren't isolated. You had 2 independent meetings with a professional fiduciary. There was no haste. We're talking about a process that unfolded over roughly 2 weeks, not 2 days. And you weren't secretive with your own decision-making, even if you were appropriately cautious about telling Jessica beforehand. The law distinguishes between those 2 things. He sent a formal response to Cole Faraday, laying out exactly that timeline, attaching the notarized documents, Beatrice Nunley's notary log showing the date, time, and duration of the signing, and a brief supporting letter from Dr. Alvarez confirming I had been assessed as fully oriented and competent during the relevant period, with specific reference to a mental status screening he'd performed as a matter of routine during my diabetes follow-up. Marcus also attached separately the accounting log Renata and I had built, the $51,400, itemized, dated, cross-referenced to statements, not as an accusation, he clarified in the cover letter, but as relevant context establishing the rational basis for the trust's creation. The 19 days between sending that letter and hearing anything back were, if I'm honest, some of the hardest of the entire ordeal. Harder in some ways than the bank incident itself. There's a specific kind of dread that comes from waiting to find out whether your own competence is going to become a matter of record, argued over by lawyers, regardless of how solid Marcus assured me the ground under me was. I checked my mail obsessively. I found myself rehearsing, uselessly, answers to questions no one had asked me yet, the way you rehearse for a test you've already passed but can't quite believe you passed. The challenge was formally withdrawn on the 19th day. A single paragraph letter from Cole Faraday's office that Marcus read to me over the phone in a voice that had a small, satisfied edge to it he rarely let show. Marcus told me afterward that in his experience, once an opposing attorney sees a fully corroborated timeline stacked against nothing but a client's frustration, the calculus shifts quickly, because pursuing it further would mean putting the itemized accounting log into a public court record, and that record would not have been kind to the position Jessica was trying to argue. I think people expect a story like mine to end with some enormous confrontation, a courtroom scene, handcuffs, a dramatic reversal where the villain gets what's coming to her in a way that feels cinematic. That's not what happened, and I've come to believe that's actually more honest, and in its own way more satisfying, than the version people might expect. Jessica was never criminally charged. I made the decision, with Marcus's guidance, not to pursue the credit card fraud as a criminal matter, in part because it would have required dragging my own grandson's mother through a process that would have consequences for a 4-year-old boy I love very much and had no part in any of this. Marcus respected that decision even though, professionally, he told me some families do go that route and it is entirely justified when they do. What did happen was quieter, and I think more permanent. The trust holds my house and my remaining assets now, managed by Renata, who I meet with quarterly and who has, in 8 months, been unfailingly professional, transparent, and, this surprised me, kind, in the specific way that competence often looks like kindness when you've spent years surrounded by neither. My medical care runs through a system where my emergency contacts are people who have proven, repeatedly, that they show up. Mrs. Patterson still hears me through the wall sometimes, though there's much less to hear these days. Jessica and I speak perhaps once a month now. Brief phone calls, careful and formal in a way that breaks my heart even as I recognize it as necessary. She has not asked me for money since the bank incident. I don't know if that's because she's genuinely reflected on any of this, or because Marcus's letter made clear there was simply nothing left to ask for. I try some days to believe it might be the former. Other days I'm honest enough with myself to doubt it. I do see my grandson, Eli. Jessica allows it. Supervised visits at first, then eventually just ordinary visits, because whatever has broken between his mother and me, she has never suggested I shouldn't be part of his life. And for that specific mercy, I am grateful in a way that surprises me. He's 4. He doesn't know any of this happened, and I intend to make sure he doesn't have to know it for a very long time, if ever. When he's older, if he asks, I'll tell him the truth, gently, the way you tell a child something true and difficult, that sometimes people we love hurt us, not because they're monsters, but because we let a pattern go on so long it started to feel like the only shape a relationship could take, and that it's possible to love someone and still close a door, if the door is the only thing standing between you and losing everything. Dr. Alvarez tells me my blood pressure has come down significantly in the past 6 months. He didn't attribute it directly to anything specific, being a careful and appropriately cautious physician, but he did say at my last appointment that reduced stress load is one of the more underrated factors in hypertension management, and he said it while looking at me in a way that made me think he understood exactly what stress load he meant. I still work at the pharmacy 3 days a week, not because I need to financially. Renata has structured things so that my retirement, what's left of it plus what's grown back under her management, covers my needs comfortably, but because I like it, and because for the first time in longer than I can remember, the things I do with my time are things I've chosen, rather than things I've been guilted or manipulated into. Marcus stops by occasionally, still in that Diamondbacks cap, checks in on the trust paperwork, asks how I'm doing in a way that feels like genuine curiosity rather than professional obligation. His mother and I have dinner every Sunday now, a habit we started during the worst of it and never stopped. I think about the version of me from 3 years ago sometimes, the woman who let dishes sit in her sink for a week rather than risk conflict, who paid an $8,000 fraudulent charge rather than have a hard conversation, who called an Uber to the emergency room with a broken wrist because her daughter had a meeting. I don't hate that woman. I understand her completely. She was doing what she thought love required. I just wish someone had told her years earlier what Mrs. Patterson eventually told me through a shared wall at midnight, that protecting yourself from someone you love isn't a betrayal of that love. Sometimes it's the only thing left that still counts as love at all. Jessica walked into that bank thinking she still had access to a life she'd been quietly draining for 3 years. She had no idea the door had already closed 3 days earlier at a kitchen table, with a man in a baseball cap and a legal pad, and a mother who had finally run out of ways to say yes. She's not my servant. She never was. But I am no longer, and will never again be, hers either.